Welcome to I Love to Tell the Story, a podcast on the narrative lectionary. I'm Rolf Jacobson.
I'm Jenny Pietz.
I'm Alan Padgett.
This is the podcast for March 30th, 2025, and the text is Luke 16, 19 through 31, which is the so-called parable of the rich man and Lazarus, which is a hard parable for those of us who believe that salvation is by grace through faith apart from works of the law. So here we go, because this text doesn't make it sound like it. So one of the things about this parable, this is Jesus, by the way, just in the context of Luke, we've got a lot of parables that we do in the narrative lectionary during this particular year in the narrative lectionary. And because Luke has so many parables that the other gospels don't have, and we've had them the last few weeks. We've had the Good Samaritan, and we've had the prodigal son, and now we have this one, which really doesn't have a parallel parable in the other gospels. And it's about a rich man. Obviously, I'm not going to retell the parable, and Lazarus. And it's clearly in the shape of the narrative. It's symbolic that in some ways, go back and, send after he dies, go back and send somebody to my, brothers and stuff. Hey, they had the prophets and so on. They didn't listen to them. They wouldn't listen to Moses and the prophets. They're not going to listen to me. What do you think?
Well, I think this is a fascinating parable, but it's also one of those ones where I'm reminded that, there's not a one-to-one relationship between the parable and some being, or there's
right.
Stories like that. We tend to call them allegories, where everything in there stands for something else or whatever. But here I think it's consistent with many of the other parables Jesus is telling in this whole part of the Gospel of Luke, which is, look, judgment is coming. Things are happening that you may not want to happen. Now is the time to open up your heart and stop living a way that is hard-hearted and rejects others. And the message there is, I think, deeply connected with this really interesting thing. Even if someone came back from the dead, they wouldn't listen. That's how sure they're not going to listen to this message I'm bringing, that even someone rose from the dead, they're not going to make a difference to them. And if that's your space in life, I'm going to say something I would be interested in what you guys think, but it seems to me that although you can not believe in God and still love your neighbor, if you have, so that connection to me doesn't work, but if you make it the other way and you're hard-hearted, you step over the dead people, the poor people, the people that, you don't even care. Someone gets hit by two motorcycles, you just leave them in the road because you got a meeting you got to go to or whatever. If you don't care about other people, it seems to me difficult to say, how can you really love God? I mean, maybe there's something there. I'm not saying I know for sure, but it's just a thought that I have when I listen to parables like this. We want to say, well, if you're an atheist, you're not going to love your neighbor. That's not true.
And along those lines, I see this parable as really paradigmatic of some of the key themes of Luke's gospel. That to live as God's people is to respond to Jesus and his message. And more than in any other gospel, Jesus is preaching, and Luke talks about how your disposition to your wealth and your possessions, your stuff, reflects your disposition to God. So having wealth isn't in and of itself evil, but it can be an obstacle to following Jesus because you don't want to leave your stuff behind and be on the road with him. And it can give you a sense of self-sufficiency and perhaps make you insensitive to the needs of others. And in Jesus' preaching in Luke, he says in Luke chapter 4 that he has been sent by God to bring good news to the poor. And I see Lazarus as epitomizing the poor, not just economically disadvantaged, which he apparently is, lying at this rich man's doorstep, waiting for a morsel of food to fall from his table. But he's also poor in the sense of marginalized due to his illness, due to his lack of social connections. I mean, it's such a sad picture. If you've ever seen paintings of this scene, you see Lazarus essentially naked with sores covering his body and the dogs coming and licking him. It's a really sad portrait. And in Luke's gospel, Jesus says, if you're going to follow me and be in right relationship with God, it means caring about people like Lazarus. It means inviting him to dinner and sharing of your wealth and your possessions with him so that he's not in this state, so that we can't profess faith in God or to be a follower of Jesus and be insensitive to the suffering of those around us.
I like that. So I have a question for one or both of you, baby Jennifer, which is, do you think it matters that sometimes it's just translated wealth or money, but that Jesus often calls wealth mammon, which was an ancient god, unrighteous mammon?
Say that again.
Sometimes Jesus calls wealth, and it happens in Luke often, mammon. And do you think that tells us what his problem is with wealth? That mammon is this old god. So is it about who you worship in the long run or what? Well,
Go ahead,
I'll just
Dr.
say,
Pietz.
I do think, Dr. Pietz, go ahead.
If you have a thought, I can follow up.
Yeah, I just think that there's something going on here besides just you happen to like things. It's like you are living your life for, this is the ultimate goal for you is your wealth. And that's why you don't help the poor. That's why you don't care about others. Is all you want to do is keep your money. I mean, money is your God. And in that case, it's not just you're a tightwad, but that you're worshiping the wrong thing.
I agree that we see often in Luke how wealth can become an idol, essentially. That which is at the center of your life, that in which you find your security. And so we see Jesus telling parables or addressing people about, storing up all this, grain in your barns, for tomorrow, because it could be lost at any moment, right? It's not that we don't need material things to live, but we're not supposed to ultimately find our security and source of life in those things. And that is the perennial human temptation. We can secure our lives by the stuff we have. And that can drive your actions. It can determine your relationships. It can be at the center of your life instead of God. So I think that is the warning that comes across a lot in the Gospel of Luke. And especially to not share your wealth is problematic for community. If we fast forward to the book of Acts, where we see the development of the early church, the community depended on everybody sharing with each other, especially to support people who are traveling and preaching the gospel. So it can be destructive to community to hoard and make that the center of your life.
I think one of the things that communities find so overwhelming is how best for Christian communities to work together and use whatever their wealth and resources they have to fight to end poverty and homelessness rather than to potentially just get involved and being taken advantage of or giving $20 to the person at the end of the off-ramp who then goes and uses it to continue abusing substances. So on the one hand, we're jaded and we're confused and we feel powerless. And so I do think it's important, though, not to give up trying to work together and with other Christian congregations in towns and cities, with other social service agencies. In Minnesota, where we live, right now there's in the courts the end of a $250 million fraud enterprise that stole from the state, claiming they were feeding children, and they weren't. And it just really makes you jaded and angry and then not want to be involved. But so I think there's ways to work with agencies that actually have track records of being well thought through and organized together to actually try to defeat poverty. Things like, Heifer Project International, or in my own tradition, Lutheran World Relief, and other agencies locally. Congregations should have local and international missions to which they are committed and over time can work to make a difference. I've often heard there's a saying, we can't feed every beggar, but we can feed the beggar at our gate. And for a congregation to take that kind of attitude, I think, is a way to try to faithfully, as you've said, follow Jesus.
I Love to Tell the Story is a production of Luther Seminary's Working Preacher. The narrative lectionary was developed at Luther Seminary and has been hosted on Working Preacher since 2011. Find episodes and links at workingpreacher.org/narrative. And be sure to rate, subscribe, and comment on YouTube. Thanks for joining us.